This will be the subjective reference frame. This will be the objective reference frame. And just for clarification, when I say reference frame or frame of reference, I mean the same thing when I'm saying that. And so this makes it easier in making these distinctions within our own frames of reference. It makes it easier to understand how to extend these concepts into the frames of reference, such as inertial frames of reference for moving bodies that are other than ourselves and may or may not necessarily have a soul or a mind or have feelings, but nonetheless you'll see the use of applying a subjective frame of reference or a non-physical component to a measurable object. The utility of these two types of frames of reference joined with basically an invariance and using that as our component for, using that as our basis for coordinates, you will see that this is a very fruitful concept, and it's easy to work with, stemming away from our own experience of having a subjective and objective frame of reference and then extending that into objects. So yes, I'm going to assume that something like this bottle of water has a subjective frame of reference. So the question is, do I think that this body has a soul or a mind? No. But what I do believe is that this bottle of water has a frame of reference relative to it that is not relative to me, and that frame of reference is what makes it so that when I put this bottle of water down and walk away, and some other person comes in and sees this bottle of water and looks at it and says, oh, this is a bottle of water, that it maintained a symmetry between the frame of reference I had relative to the bottle and the frame of reference some other person has relative to the bottle, meaning there is something relative to this bottle such that it makes it maintain its identity as a bottle of water. And I'm going to call that the subjective frame of reference. So for instance, the things that we associate in our subjective frame of reference are mind, our soul, our thoughts. Though it can be argued very strongly, not necessarily for the soul, but more for thoughts and mind, that there is a physical component, a brain, just because there's a brain does not mean that thoughts and mind are not something completely orthogonal, independent, completely distinct from a brain. There is nothing to, and modern philosophers can argue this one until the sun comes down, back and forth, whether or not specific brains are the only thing that allow for mind and thoughts, and can a computer also come up with mind and thoughts, so on and so forth. You guys can argue with that amongst yourselves. I'm not interested in it because I'm just going to assume that mind and thought are not the same thing as brain. And yes, maybe you need a brain in order to have mind and thought, but that these are completely separate, distinct, orthogonal properties, and that these are part of a subjective frame of reference, or being more non-physical, and these are part of an objective frame of reference, more physical. For instance, back to the issue as to physicality and non-physicality. Notice that the subjective frame of reference, though it is more towards the non-physical, it also has physical attributes. For instance, this kind of it's kind of an abstract concept, but if you think about it, the concept of mind and thought inherently have the concept of brain attached to them, such that we associate mind and thoughts as things, as products of sentient beings that have mind, that have brains. So the physical attribute of the measurable attribute of a brain, the objective concept of a brain, this physical thing over here, is inherent to mind and thought. So though these are more subjective or more non-physical, they do have a physical, objective entanglement or attachment to them, or a minor component, if you will. Going back to that some things are more physical and non-physical than others. So, and then if you think of a brain, just very easily, let's go to the atomic or even subatomic level of a brain, and we have all this empty space in between. So even though a brain is more physical, more objective, more, something that's physical, it too even has a slight non-physical attribute to it. We can argue back and forth about, what is physical, what is non-physical, define something that's specific. But the point being is that I'm leaving this definition slightly open and not so restrictive for a reason. And that reason is that as we go further with these concepts of subjective and objective frames of reference, it becomes much more clear that those arguments that could arise on the way to where we're going become pointless arguments when we get beyond where we're at this point with these concepts. So at some latter point, I'm sure a more exact and specific definition of objective and non-physical will be demanded, but it's not necessary to have prior to moving forward, because in a general sense, we already know what I mean by objective and subjective. So what I'm going to go do, and I'm going to go ahead and orient myself. And what I would like you to notice is that I have in front of me the objective reference frame, and I have behind me the subjective frame of reference. And what I would like you to do at home or wherever you are while you're watching this, I want you to think of yourself sort of in the same position I am, but relative to yourself. And here's how it goes. Let's just assume for a moment that your visual field is your only sense. It is the only means by which you're obtaining information about reality. So if you extend from the side of your head outwards like this, when you're perpendicular, like how I am perpendicular to your frame of reference right now, everything in this direction, we'll just call that the objective frame of reference. And it's kind of interesting that as I rotate relative to myself, that the objective frame of reference is more or less always in front of me, given that my sense organs, assuming that sight is the only sense that I have, are directed in this way. Therefore, everything from that way, this direction, is what I am observing. So that's my objective frame of reference. And then my internal senses, my feelings, my thoughts, all of that stuff is happening in that direction relative to the objective frame of reference. So if you notice just with your own sense of sight that your objective frame of reference, as I'm defining it, in front of you, and you look around, there's all your objective references, and then your subjective frame of reference is behind you. And no matter how much you turn, rotate, or orient yourself, you always will have that blind spot, or whatever you want to call it, a place of nonsense. And I don't mean nonsense as in ridiculous, I mean nonsense as in it not being sensed. And that is what I mean by non-physical, the non-sensed attributes of existence. And we can find them within ourselves, so I am assuming that they are within all things. And even when we go back to the concept of how physical objects have all this empty space in them. Well, maybe the empty space and the geometry that's organizing these, or how these objects are organized, however you want to put it, maybe that is the subjective frame of reference of an inanimate object. Like, for instance, sort of as more of like a Platonic or a Platonist view of eternal forms, maybe the eternal form of an object is its subjective frame of reference. And then how that eternal form comes into manifestation is its objective frame of reference. However that's going to pan out, I'm not too concerned at this point, because it's real simple to create a distinction between objective and subjective, physical, non-physical, and use those distinctions for the purpose of making a coordinate system. To just illustrate this point a little bit more, so let's just go ahead and map out my objective frame of reference. We'll go ahead and put perspective in here. So here's my objective frame of reference. And it's inside a room, and there's a little table here, and on that table there's a lamp, and then we got a window. I guess it is hot where I'm at. So there's a ceiling fan, and so here's my objective frame of reference. I'm objectively observing, and I can come in here and I can measure the window. I can find out all kinds of things about the window. We got light coming off the lamp. I've got light coming in the window. I could do some experiments and measure the frequencies of the light. I've got fan turbulence, so I can get in all kinds of measurements here. This is my objective frame of reference. So now let's get a little bit more abstract here. Come over to the subjective frame of reference, and obviously I'm drawing on a board, so I'm going to have to make objective references to subjectivity. And so the irony in all this is I'm going to describe subjectiveness using objective concepts. However, don't get lost in the fact that though I'm drawing something on the board, I am trying to describe something that is non-physical. And the only things I have are physical, measuring instruments like this measuring stick. And so though it may seem awkward to use a measuring stick to measure something that is immeasurable, it serves as an analogy to get our understanding of a concept such as non-physical down a little bit more. Okay. So let's go ahead and just let this, this will be our subjective frame of reference. And I'm not going to go ahead and draw parallel lines of perspective, because, we're not perceiving anything in our non-physical subjective frame of reference. But, let's say like I get a thought or an emotion of excitement. That's what these cluster of exclamation points and stars and stuff like that is. It's like a burst of some kind of non-physical, whatever it is, expression of feeling or what have you, a thought, an epiphany, or just walking around the corner and observing something. Here's the subjective frame of reference of that. So you can sort of see, I open my eyes, I see the lamp, and wham, I have that subjective response to this objective reference. So that is sort of a way to think about how I'm making these distinctions between subjective reference and objective frame of reference. So I hope I've gotten those two distinct ideas a little bit more clear.